Hey guys, it's Laree with wagonwheelhomestead.com. Welcome back to my channel. I am gonna do a video for you today that's been much requested, and that is I'm gonna have you come along with me while we make bread for farmers market. Now it's gonna look a little different than what I had envisioned. So typically I make bread, some bread on Monday, some bread on Tuesday, some bread on Wednesday, and the Monday and Tuesday bread I put in the freezer. And then Thursday morning, we get up really early and we load all the vegetables that we've harvested on Wednesday and all the bread and all the things, and we take them in town for farmer's market for like 4 hours. We just do our own little pop-up farmer's market. There is one other vendor that happens to be there the same time that we do, but it's not like it's an organized farmer's market because we're in a small town and it's just the day that works for us, and everybody sort of knows like that's where you go and when you go if you want produce. And so it works out for us. And so, you know, that might be something some of you can do, some of you that are very interested in sourdough. If you want to start baking sourdough in bulk and selling it, there's lots of ways to do it. I'm not going to tell you at all that this is the only way or the best way. It's just what works for me. And I've had several of you say, like, how do you make big batches? Like, how do you fit that in your life? How does that work? So I'm going to bring you along today for the good, bad, and the ugly on how we bake. You know, it ends up with flour flying. I mean, my whole kitchen, like, it ends up being a disaster, okay? But this is how it works for me. What's different about today is a couple days ago, we got a really bad hailstorm, the third hailstorm of the year for us. And if you missed that, go back a couple videos and you will find, I did a video of like salvaging what we could from the garden. So anyway, you'll see that. But I was busy for the last couple of days. This is Wednesday. I was busy on Monday and Tuesday with not only the hailstorm, but cleaning out what I could of the garden because it's hot this week, and so I didn't want the rest of whatever was out there to bake, right? So it's Wednesday, so I'm doing like all of the baking today. The other thing that's different is I'm not harvesting any vegetables today. So what I had envisioned is I would take you along, we'd harvest the vegetables, and we would also, you know, I'd show you how I fit the baking in around that. But anyway, all we're gonna do today is bake. We're gonna do Amish white bread, sourdough sandwich bread, and we're also going to do sourdough cinnamon twists. Those are really popular at market. I'm not gonna do any sourdough artisan bread, which I typically do because I have some in the freezer from last week. So here's the deal. If you put bread in the freezer the same day you bake it, right? Like let it cool off, put it in the freezer the same day you bake it. When you thaw it out, it tastes fresh baked, right? Like that's the best way to do it. So ideally, I would get up Thursday morning before farmer's market and bake 60 to 70 loaves of bread, right? But that is not possible because all I'm using is my Bosch mixer, which saves me so much time. It's definitely the workhorse for this video and for, you know, for what we make every week for market. So you're gonna see a lot of the Bosch mixer just, you know, hammering out all the dough. But I also just bake this in my home oven. So I do not have fancy ovens. I do have another oven downstairs, but I rarely ever use it because I'd have to haul all the bread down there and back up. It just doesn't work out. So anyway, I'm gonna kind of walk you through how I typically do it on a normal week, but understand today we're just doing it all in one day just because of how the week went. And I'm not sure that I'll be doing this again this year because I don't have any vegetables to take. And we do fairly well with the bread, but it really only makes sense for us to go to market if we have vegetables and bread. So I wanted to go ahead and film it because I might not be doing this again until next year. And I know many of you really want to know, like, how do I bulk bake sourdough, right? And sometimes what I'll do even is like before Christmas, and I might even add a couple Christmas breads in, you know, with it. But before Christmas, sometimes I will like get online and have people place orders, you know, people that are used to my bread. And then I just go to town and I have like 1 hour where I drop it off. Like I'll be at this location with your bread, you know, 4 o'clock on a Tuesday or whatever. It's usually right before Christmas. It works out really well because people can order and get the breads and the, you know, the cinnamon rolls, whatever, that they want for Christmas. And it works out well too because I have Christmas presents to buy for my kids, right? So it is a lot of work, but you know, it's a couple days of flour all over your kitchen. And it works out, right? If you can sell a bunch of bread. So typically in the summertime, you know, we'll do this for 12 weeks straight, right? So every Monday I'll make the Amish white bread. Every Tuesday I'll make the sourdough sandwich bread. Every Wednesday I'll make cinnamon twists and artisan bread. And we just, you know, for 12 weeks straight. So that's what I wanted to show you, right? But anyways, the garden isn't cooperating this year because of the hail. So I'm just gonna take you along and we're gonna start off with making some Amish white bread. And so we mixed that up this morning. And we went and milked and it's rising. And so right now I'm gonna mix up the sourdough sandwich bread. And then I'll show you, you know, just kind of how we keep rolling through. I can only bake, well, I only choose to bake 8 loaves in my oven at a time just because that works out the best as far as how the heat distributes in my oven. So 8 loaves at a time, and I only have 8 bread pans anyway. So, I mean, I could get more, but this has just always worked. And I do 60 to 70 loaves a week. Well, that's including the sourdough cinnamon twists and the artisan bread. 60 to 70 loaves a week of bread, take it to farmer's market. So anyway, like I said, I'm gonna walk you through what I did to start the Amish white bread. Now we're gonna do the sourdough sandwich bread. And then this afternoon we'll work on the sourdough cinnamon twists, take them to market tomorrow morning. So anyway, I hope this video is helpful to you and I hope that you enjoy it. So whenever I am ready to bake bread, what I do is I try to start the process first thing in the morning. So typically on a Monday, which this is Wednesday, but on a Monday, I would mix up 2 batches of 4 loaves, right? So 4 loaves at a time, 2 batches, which makes 8 loaves. In my Bosch mixer, I use my Bosch mixer for everything except for the artisan bread. It just saves me so much work. And by the way, I have a special code for you down in the description box below and a link where you can get $20 off a Bosch mixer. They is one of the best investments in your kitchen that you will ever make, in my humble opinion. I've had mine for many years. It's made thousands of loaves of bread and it's literally indestructible. I can be kind of hard on things in the kitchen just because I do so much at a time, and I've never had any issues with my Bosch. So I can guarantee you it's indestructible and they will last for a lifetime. You know, it can mix up large batches of dough and mix them all day. Like if you forgot it running, it would mix all day long. And so that is a big blessing to me because my KitchenAid mixer I used to have, it would always quit after 3 or 4 minutes of mixing. Like it would heat up and then it would quit. So anyway, first thing in the morning, before I go do chores, this is usually breakfast time. Everybody's eating breakfast. I quickly put the ingredients into the mixer for the first 4 loaves, and then I might, you know, eat some of my breakfast, do a couple dishes, and then quickly put the ingredients in for the next 4 loaves. It takes like less than 2 or 3 minutes for me to put all the ingredients into the mixer. It's just really not a big deal. Of course, I keep my bag of flour sitting right next to the mixer. You know, all the ingredients are out, right? Because we're going to be making bread. It's going to be a big mess. It's just how it works for me. And again, I have to fit it in around my busy life, right? It's not like it's the only thing I'm doing. And so it's just how this ends up working out. So it doesn't take very long to throw the ingredients in. And after you've made this recipe a few hundred times, you know, you get to where you know exactly what to put in. You don't have to look at a recipe. I sort of measure a little bit, but not really precisely, and it always works out just fine. So I let it mix for a few minutes, and then again, you know, take all of the dough out and put it into another bowl just on the counter, right? Because you can't have all 8 loaves in your Bosch mixer at one time. And then I'm going to put the ingredients in for a second batch of 4 loaves, mix that up and add it also to the bowl on the counter. And then just let it all rise. Just cover it with a towel and let it rise until I'm back from chores. And once it's doubled in size in an hour or 2, then it's time to shape it for baking. And by the way, all of the recipes that I use are on my blog, wagonwheelhomestead.com. So this is the Amish white bread. This is actually not a sourdough bread. This is a yeast bread. It's a sweeter bread. It's not as healthy as sourdough, but it's one that a lot of people really like. It's a great sandwich bread. And so you can find that recipe on the blog, wagonwheelhomestead.com. This batch you can see is a little bit sticky, but it's all going to work out just fine. I always feel the dough before I am done mixing, just to see if I need to add a little bit more flour. And I always mix it until it pulls away from the edge of the bowl. So that's how I kind of know that it's got enough flour. And then at the end, of course, I just test it to make sure that it isn't too sticky. I've made this so many times. Sometimes it's a little stickier, sometimes it's a little bit drier, and it always works out just fine. And so here I am just, adding in all of those same ingredients again. And I could get a very large mixer, like a professional mixer, and mix up like 16 loaves at a time, or even 32 loaves at a time if I wanted to. But then I have to live with that big mixer somewhere. I have to store it somewhere all year long. It really doesn't take very long to use this Bosch. The other thing is I would have to clean that mixer, and that would take an incredible amount of time. It just doesn't seem worth it to me for just a few weeks of bread. It's not like we're doing this in a bakery year round. And so it works out really well just to use my Bosch. And again, it's indestructible. It's really fast to clean up, and it works really well. So I don't mind just mixing up double batches. And typically what I do, and you'll see this, is I mix up 2 batches in the morning, and I can get them baked by around lunchtime. At lunchtime, I mix up 2 more batches, and I get those baked by supper time. And so then that's how I end up with 16 loaves of this kind of bread in one day. Now, today we're going to push the envelope a little bit, and I'm going to mix up some sourdough sandwich bread shortly, and try to keep my bread pans full with rising bread all day and do all of it in one day. So something else that you want to think about is, especially for your sourdough bread, you're going to want to feed your sourdough with a whole bunch of flour and water. And I don't measure. You're going to want to do this, the night before or ahead of time for the sourdough portion, which usually includes the artisan bread. And I'm going to do a video pretty soon on how to bulk bake artisan bread. So I'll show you that also, even though I'm not doing it today. And then the sourdough sandwich bread and the sourdough cinnamon twist, all of that takes sourdough starter. And so what I do is I just get a big stainless steel bowl in my kitchen. I put a little bit of sourdough discard or starter in the bottom, and then I feed it a whole bunch of flour and water, like maybe 8 cups of flour, and then I just pour water in and stir until it has the right consistency that I'm looking for, a pretty thick consistency. And I'll let that all sour and ferment overnight. And so then I have a big bowl of active sourdough starter to use in all of the recipes, and that seems to work out really well. So I'm just covering up the Amish white bread. We're going to let that rise, and then now I'm actually back from milking, and I'm going to start the sourdough sandwich bread, because as soon as I can shape the Amish white bread and get it in the pans and it's baked, as soon as that bread is baked, I want to have this bread risen and ready to go into the pans. Now, because I'm rushing things just a little bit today, I'm actually making sourdough discard sandwich bread, and that recipe's on the website as well. So this particular sandwich bread has just a little bit of yeast in it, which is going to help the sourdough to rise. And that's because we're rushing things a little bit. But typically what I will do is I will mix up the pre-ferment, which you'll see that in the sourdough sandwich bread recipe, the regular recipe on the website. I'll mix that up the night before, enough for 4 loaves. And then in the morning, this would be like for a Tuesday, right? So Monday we would have made Amish white bread. Tuesday we're going to make sourdough sandwich bread. And on Tuesday morning then I will mix up 2 batches of 4 loaves each. So 8 loaves of the sourdough sandwich bread. And then I'll mix up the pre-ferment and have it ready for the bread that I'm going to mix up in the middle of the day, like around lunchtime. And then I bake it, of course, by supper time after it's risen, and put it in the pans, and then it rises some more. So by supper time again, on Tuesday evening, I have baked 16 loaves of the sourdough sandwich bread. And again, it's typically the long fermented version. This particular batch is the discard version with a little bit of yeast added, just because we're trying to do this more quickly. But then what I'll do is at the end of Monday and the end of Tuesday, I will be sure to bag up the bread once it's cool, put the labels on it, and then I'll put it into the freezer. right away. So if you freeze it the same day that you bake it, then it will taste fresh baked when it is thawed out. I've never had anybody complain. I've never had any issues with doing that. Now that we have the sourdough sandwich bread mixed up, we're going to shape the Amish white bread. And so I'm just going to butter these pans really quickly. You can use butter or tallow, any kind of grease. And I do not wash my pans in between. That's the one of the advantages of bulk baking bread of any kind is you don't have to wash your bowls in between. You don't have to wash your mixer in between, right? Just because you're constantly mixing up dough. There's constantly something being baked. And so there is a fair bit of dishes at the end of this process, I will be honest with you, but you've produced 60 to 70 loaves of bread, worth probably around $300 or so. Really hasn't taken you a lot of active time to make the bread. And so if you have to spend a little bit of time doing dishes, I suppose that's par for the course. So anyway, I'm just going to get these ready for shaping the Amish white bread. And you can see here it has doubled nicely. So I'm just this is all 8 loaves. Remember that we mixed up first thing this morning. So I'm just gonna dump this out on the counter and start shaping it. And I will, in a few minutes be mixing up another 8 loaves of the Amish white bread, and I'll be sticking it in this same bowl. So no need to wash this bowl either. This is just the Amish white bread bowl for today. It does pay to have a stack of large stainless steel bowls. I like to use them for canning, and of course I use them for a lot of bulk baking as well. Then using a bench scraper, I'm just going to divide this into 8 different pieces. So I start by just dividing it in half and then into quarters, and then I sort of cut it like a pie. You could get a scale out and weigh these. If I was doing this for a bakery, that's probably what I would do. But again, this is just for farmers market. Nobody ever minds. The loaves are usually pretty similar in size. You just learn after you've done a few thousand loaves that you kind of learn what size to make them. But I just sort of cut it like you would cut it up in pie shapes, and that ends up making, about the same size loaves. So once I get it into the different sizes, see, I'm just cutting off a little bit and putting it into a different pile, feeling them and trying to figure out which one maybe is a little bigger than the others. Then I'm just going to tuck the ends underneath and kind of roll them up. I don't do any fancy shaping. It seems to work just fine for me. And then right into the pans they go. And you can shape 8 loaves of bread in pretty short order. As you can see, even with all the counter space in my kitchen, things get a little wild with dough everywhere. Dough and flour and kids, but it's all good. It's part of it. So again, just shaping these as quickly as possible, and then I'm going to cover them back up with the same cloth that I used to cover the bowl. So, again, at the end of this, you end up with quite a few tea towels that are dirty as well, just because you've used them for either putting in the bannetons for the artisan bread or for covering dough. But you just do a load of laundry and then a big batch of dishes at the end, and all is well. And now I'm just adding the last of the sourdough sandwich bread that we had finished mixing up while I started this shaping process into the sourdough sandwich bowl of dough. I'm going to let it do its first rise, and I'm going to wait just a little bit time-wise here because, you know, these all are going to have to bake before I can do any more Amish white bread. So I'm going to wait an hour or two and then mix up some Amish white bread again because we're, you know, doing this all on one day. So, you know, I can do that because I'm not outside harvesting, but really on a regular day, what I can do is mix up dough in the morning at breakfast, come in really quick and stick it in the oven. You know, just use a timer on your phone, right, to keep yourself from forgetting while you're out in the garden. And then I mix up more dough at lunch and bake it just before supper. Like, I'm really not spending very much time in the kitchen for this amount of dough, especially if you spread it out over 3 days. Now, today I'm not doing any of the harvesting in the garden, so of course I'm just, you know, pushing the envelope and doing a little bit more all at one time in the kitchen. And then it works best for me to put 4 loaves on the top shelf and 4 loaves on the bottom shelf of my oven. And yes, my oven does need cleaned. That is something that will happen during our fall cleaning. As I promised, this video will include the good, the bad, and the ugly. But that's just real life. That is just part of baking this much bread, is your oven's not always going to be perfectly clean. But that's okay. We accomplish all of this and it helps to feed our family and bless others at the same time. So that's just part of it. And then a couple hours later, as promised, mixing up more Amish white bread dough. And you can see, you know, I just keep all the stuff right here on the counter. I don't wash my measuring cups or anything in between, and that just helps to make the process smoother and faster and helps us to get it all accomplished. And for large amounts of baking like this, I typically get my flour from Sam's Club because it is so much cheaper. Now, it's not as healthy, but I don't have a clientele of people that are really interested in organic. So for me to spend like 3 or 4 times the amount of money on the flour just really doesn't make sense. It makes a lot more sense for me to get good, healthy flour at a less expensive cost from Sam's. And so that is how I bake these large amounts of dough. And that's how I keep the cost fairly inexpensive also. I have done a lot with fresh milled flour, and I'll be talking about that more on our channel soon. But it doesn't make sense for me to use all fresh milled flour cost-wise and effort-wise for large bulk baking days like this. And so, you know, you can do whatever works best for you, right? Depends on what you can get access to, but I can get this flour shipped in to me fairly inexpensive, and that helps me to keep baking all through the farmer's market season all summer long. I do always get my yeast from Azure Standard. It's always the highest quality and cheaper than what I could get at my local grocery store anyway. And so, and I'm not measuring because again, I have poured yeast, 4 tablespoons of yeast into my mixer so many times I feel like I know exactly how much to put in. It always seems to work out just fine. Anyway, this is the second batch of the Amish white bread, actually the 4th batch for the day. And get this mixed up and let it rise. Then we'll work on another batch of sourdough sandwich bread. And a little later in the afternoon, we will start mixing up the sourdough cinnamon twists. Getting out some of my cooling racks for the first batch of bread coming out of the oven. You can also see my fermented jalapenos sitting pretty in jars on my counter. I covered that in the hail video. We had a bunch of jalapenos that were damaged but needed to be preserved right away, and I turned them into fermented jalapenos. That's a new recipe on the blog and one that I think you will really enjoy. If you're new to fermenting, I think that you will really like checking that out. So fermented jalapenos are similar to pickled jalapenos, and they're really delicious. So today I'm just checking the bread to see. Sometimes, depending on your oven, some of the stuff on the top rack will need to be moved to the bottom rack. to get done all the way. You'll get to where you can kind of tell by looking. I don't test the temperature on everything. I just, have gotten to where I kind of know exactly what is done and what isn't. And it usually doesn't take another like 5 minutes if you have to put something on the top or the bottom to get it browned and done all the way. My sourdough sandwich bread rose over the top of the bowl while we were waiting on the oven, which is fine. It's not that big of a deal. So again, just stuffing that all back into the bowl and getting ready to shape it. I will let my bread pans cool off just a little bit before buttering them, sticking this dough in, and you'll see me shape it the very same way. And we'll let this rise, and then it will also get baked in the oven. Very similar process all the way through. Then when the sourdough sandwich bread has risen and is ready to be baked in the oven, I get out my bread lame that I use on my artisan bread, and I like to make slashes in the tops of these loaves because it allows the loaves to expand a little better. It also helps me to know which is which when it comes time to bagging up all the bread. And so I'm going to bake this in a 375-degree oven for 30 minutes. Same thing, I will check and make sure that it's done. You can usually tell by how brown it is and how it smells. And then we'll move on to baking the next batch of Amish white bread. then to bag up the bread, I just buy a big roll of 12-inch by 20-inch bags from Amazon, and I'll put a link to those in the description box below. They work really well for the large size of my loaves. And I just bag them all up, put the twisty ties on. Then I also get labels from onlinelabels.com. They are a waterproof label, which is great because when you put the bread in the freezer and then you thaw it out, sometimes there's some condensation and you don't want that to ruin your label. So the labels are a little more expensive just because they are waterproof. But I find that my customers, like being able to tell what kind of bread they have. And of course, I want the labels to look nice also. I just print the prices. I get $7 a loaf, and I put the prices right on the label so that I don't have to label anything or price it separate. And that way, when anybody comes to purchase bread, they automatically know right away how much it costs. And now it's time to start mixing up the sourdough cinnamon twist. You can see my counters are starting to fill up with bread. That's just how it works out for us. So for the sourdough cinnamon twists also, the recipe for those is on the blog. They're very similar to sourdough cinnamon rolls, but they're actually faster to make into a twist, which you will see, rather than cutting them into individual rolls. And so that's why I started making them into a twist or a wreath. Looks like a kind of a braid or a wreath like. And my customers have just come to really love the sourdough cinnamon bread, as they call it. And so what I do is I also mix up 4 batches of the sourdough cinnamon rolls, sourdough cinnamon twist, in my Bosch at a time. And I have made up to 24 of these. I live in a small town, so you're only going to sell so many, right? I have made up to 24. Today, I'm just going to make 12, which means I'm going to mix up 3 batches in my mixer. But once you have all your stuff out, it doesn't take very long to mix them up. And then it also doesn't take very long to roll them out. Now, you can mix these up ahead of time and let them long ferment. A lot of times I will do that. If I have time, I'll mix them up at lunch or even mid-morning and let the dough just sit and rest until towards evening when I have time, when I'm done harvesting in the garden, to turn them into twists and bake them. But today, of course, we're doing things a little bit different. And I always add the baking powder and baking soda that is optional in the recipe. I always add it in because then if it doesn't get to raise quite as long or whatever, they will still puff up nicely in the oven because that's what will be leavening it, not the sourdough. Now, if I just make this for my family, I often mix it up the night before, which you can see on the blog, and then it raises overnight and I just bake it first thing in the morning. But of course, that's not going to work out since I need these cooled off and frosted and ready to go to market first thing in the morning. Then I just divide each batch into 4, and if you do it right, you can have your mixer mixing up the next batch, if you're baking these quickly, while you're rolling out the first 4. So if you do this enough times, you do get it figured out. And we're just having a quick supper of burgers. It's usually pretty easy meal on the night before market because there's so much to do. What I have done is I've mixed up a big batch of the butter and brown sugar and cinnamon mixture. And again, I don't usually measure. I usually put a bunch of butter in a bowl, add a bunch of cinnamon and brown sugar until it looks right. But the exact measurements for the recipe are on the blog. So feel free to measure exactly as you wish. And I'm just rolling it out. The longer your dough is, the larger your twist will be, or the more room there will be in the middle. So it doesn't really matter, but I always try to make it sort of long and skinny. And then I'm just rolling these up, and then I will show you how I cut them into a twist. Now you could cut them into cinnamon rolls, but that would take longer and it just wouldn't bake up quite the same. And so I'll show you, how I've learned to do this quickly and bake several of these at a time. So I'm just going to kind of lengthen it out, make sure it's all twisted together really nicely. And then because I am going to be baking 12 of these, I'm just going to rip off 12 sheets of parchment paper all at one time, so I have all of those ready. Just makes this better. What you're going to see is I'm going to bake 6 of these in the oven at a time. I'm going to put 2 on a cookie sheet, and I have 3 racks in my oven. So if I use all 3 racks and I use 2 per cookie sheet, that's 6. So I can bake all of these in about an hour. And you can be twisting, making the next 6 twists while the first 6 are baking. So after a while, and of course if you have all your baking stuff out and everything's a mess already anyway, it is pretty quick to go through making all the cinnamon twists. I like to use a serrated knife that has a sharp point on it, and I just very quickly slice these down the center. Usually takes a couple times to get all the way through. And then I'm going to pinch together the far end just to start the twist, pull it apart gently, and I'm just going to twist it around in a twist, or like similar to a braid. Just round and around, and then I swing it around into a circle and right onto a piece of parchment paper. And if you do this enough times, you get really fast at it. You also realize that it bakes up pretty, even if it's not absolutely perfect when you make the twist. So, and then I just put one on one side of the cookie sheet, and we'll stick another one on the right next to it. And I try to have the parchment papers standing up between the 2 twists, and that way if any filling or butter bakes out, it doesn't end up, baking into the other one. It sort of keeps them mess free. And you can go through a lot of dough and make a lot of twists in a short order with this method. This is also really popular at Christmas. So if you say you're going to have these cinnamon braids ready for people to purchase like the day before Christmas, or even the day before Christmas Eve, like Christmas Eve, they really like to purchase these because then they don't have to bake cinnamon rolls for Christmas morning. So this is a really popular thing. It's also a great way to give gifts, right? And if you can bake a whole bunch at one time, you can knock out all your gift giving for all your neighbors without it taking years of your life making candy or whatever. And because it's sourdough, it is, healthier than candy as well. So there's lots of different options for these cinnamon twists, and if you learn how to bake them quickly, even better. My daughter's been wanting to learn how to make these twists as well, so she's a little slower at it than I am because she hasn't had as much practice, but she's doing really well. I'm very proud of her and thankful for her help, and I'm sure she'll be just as fast as I am, and maybe even better at it before too long. this is what they look like all baked up and ready for frosting. And I just let them cool overnight because it was late in the night when we got these done. And then we'll add frosting first thing in the morning. And I just mix up a big batch of the frosting, the cream cheese frosting listed on the blog. You can find the exact measurements there. And then I can just easily spread this on. You can do it when they're still warm as well, but it was really late, and so I just did it super early in the morning before we put these in boxes. I'm going to put them in cake boxes with nice little labels on the top, and then out the door we will go to farmer's market. It's going to be a lot easier to fit this bread in the back of my expedition instead of having to fit all the vegetables in as well, although I very much wish that we had vegetables, but it is what it is. We will be thankful for what we do have and what we can share with others. And I will put a link to these cake boxes in the description box below. And they're really easy to, they ship flat, so they're really easy to just put together. They don't take up a lot of room. And I just put I don't use a waterproof label on these. I just put a brown label on the top. And I get that from online labels as well, just a craft brown label, because these aren't going to go in the freezer, and so they don't need to have a waterproof label. And so we're just going to stack all these up, haul them off to market, set up our table, enjoy seeing all of the people from our community that we appreciate so much. They always support us, and we appreciate that so much. And so, yeah, this is how I bulk bake sourdough for farmers market. And I'll do a video really soon on how I do the artisan bread. So you can see, I just mix up like 6, sometimes even 12 loaves in a bowl and do big stretch and folds, big bulk ferments and cold ferments. Anyway, I'll try to show you that pretty soon. But this is how we got ready for this week's market. I hope the video was inspiring to you. If you have questions, just drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.